Hi everyone, welcome to lesson number 4 in the Flutterflow series. In this lesson, what we're going to be doing is concentrating on the widget of columns, rows, and containers. Now, the reason these are particularly important is they're very useful in controlling the behavior of your page. So to start this off, what I've done is create a third page in my app, which is completely blank. And when I create that, I usually have the default of a column. So we might start with columns to start off with. Now, within a column, as we've mentioned previously in earlier lessons, column is designed to create items that stack on top of each other one after another. Sorry, and to do that, what happens what happens is we can just start loading them in. So now I'm going to use another widget you haven't seen before, which is a container. So I'm going to throw that container in, okay? And what you'll see is that when we have a look at clicking on that and we go to the column is the width of the container. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to extend the container right across the screen. Now, one thing to highlight at this point is some of the behaviors of these sort of things is you can see the width number here is changing as I'm dragging to create the size. Now, the problem is that if we have a look at what happens when we change container size and then we change screen size. So let's say we're no longer viewing it on a standard phone, we're now viewing it on iPad. If we have a look, the column does not expand across the screen. And if we want those sort of behaviors, sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. So you can see that no matter what the screen size, it stays remain the same size. Then we set a specific value, like what we've done here. Now, however, if we want to instead have it extend across the entire space that's available, what we can do is instead of creating and dragging the item across, is we can create the infinite. So if we click on that sort of infinity symbol, what happens now is that when I change the width of the site, it stretches to however wide the device is that's being viewed at. So this is referred to as responsive behaviors, and these are things you should definitely be considering, because obviously when you're using your app on a device, and if you don't take it into account, your app doesn't look so good. Okay, so that's just something to highlight here. But basically, we've got a container now, and just to make it easy to see what's going on, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a second container. Now, to do that, I can either go and select one, just like what I've done from the widget here, and I'll go through if I pop it in, I'll go through the same process of having to reset everything to get it to what I want and those sort of things. However, a quicker way to do it, if I delete it now, is I can just hit Control D, and that will duplicate the container. So now I have two containers, and you can see that in the widget tree. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is instead of making these 100, I'm going to make them 200 deep. Okay, now at the moment we've got two 200 deep or long or height, whatever you want to call it, containers. Now, to make sure we can see which container is where, I'm going to change the background color just for the purposes of demonstration. So we'll make this one orange, and we'll make this one green or some other color. It doesn't really matter. Any old color will do. Okay. Now what I'm going to do now is I'm going to duplicate to show you a specific property of this columns. So the problem with a column, and if I duplicate yet another one, if I create another one, it lets me do it. Control D, there we go. Okay, now what happens now is that, I'll make this one a different color again, make that gray. Okay, is we've now got our 4 sections on the screen. Now the problem is that if let's say we want 4 sections and they're all 200 wide because we've got an area in each one, an area we want to have different elements on the page and we want to put them in a container. Now the problem when doing that is that we've got an issue with overflow, okay, where basically the space on the device no longer allows it. So what we want to be able to, and if we show what happens in a test mode, which I've, if I click one now to show you what's going on with the test mode, and sorry, I've forgotten to create a button to actually get to the page 3 because we can't get to it, we can't see it. So I'm just going to change this over to page 3 and I'll get rid of that for the moment. Action, and we'll pick a different, so we'll go to page 3 for us just so we can actually get to it. Okay, sorry about that, it was a bit of a sidestep. Okay. Now, when we come across, when it eventually comes up, we'll go across. Hopefully, if it does it in a second. Okay, so we've got our column here. If we scroll down, what you'll see is that we've got our elements, and then you've got this sort of yellow and black area. So what that's telling you is this is what happens when you don't have your settings right. And basically what the program is telling you is it's telling you it's not going to cause an error, but you're not going to be able to see half of the element that's below here. It's overflown by 4 pixels. It even gives you a number here. Now that's how it appears when we get an overflow to a page. So that just basically means the elements are bigger than the space that's available. Now what we can do though is we can change the properties of the column to create what's referred to as a scrollable container, or scrollable column. So if we set the column to scrollable, what that does is it allows the user to be able to see all our elements and it's scrolling up and down. So all of a sudden what we can do is we can fit more elements in than actually would fit on the screen. We're just allowing the user to scroll up and down, which is awesome. Okay, so that's just a really simple property that allows you to do that. So it's right down the bottom, okay, and it just allows the container to scroll. So now when we go back to our test mode and have a look, what you'll see is that that error should have gone. It comes back in a second. There we go, and back to where we were. Okay, and if we scroll down, so we no longer get that error, and we have scrollability. You can see that little arrow up and down there. Okay, so that suddenly gives you a lot more flexibility in how you construct your columns. Now, this is particularly useful if you want to have elements on a screen that you want some of it to be fixed and constantly viewable, and then others that you sometimes access and therefore need to be scrollable. So let's have a look at how we might set that up. So I'm going to take these containers out and we'll start again from scratch. Okay, so we've got our column, okay, and then we're going to add a container. Now the container in this case, with the I want the container here not to be scrollable. I want to be able to keep that that area fixed at the top. So what I can do is I can fix the column and I can say, well, I'm going to add my first container. Okay? And then we're going to do the same thing as what we did before. We're going to make it infinite, so it stretches across, and we'll make it, we'll just start with 200. Okay, and so we might have a container here that is fixed at the top, and then what we want to do is we want to have, from this point onwards downwards, we want to have this section scrollable. So to do that, what we can do is we can whack another container in. Okay, and when we whack out another container in, this time we can make it as big as we like. So at the moment, when I stretch it on the screen, it comes down to it comes down to 800. Okay, so basically what I'm doing there is, and I'll put this to infinite, is I'm basically creating a space in which I'm going to have some elements moving. Now at this stage it's just a container, okay? So to fix that issue up, what we're going to do is we're going to add within the container a column. Okay, so basically effectively what I'm doing by creating this container here is I'm showing you a window which is the size that I'm willing to give as real estate on the page. And then what I want to be able to do is within that window only, I want to make that scrollable so I can see a bunch of different elements. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a container in there. Okay, so within that container, hopefully it's done. Yep, within that thing we've now got a column. Okay, so with that column, what we can then do is we can make it scrollable. Okay, and then we can add containers within there. So you can, okay, so if I add my containers, and this time I'm going to do the same thing, and just for the purpose of just demonstrating this, let's say we have one that is this long, okay, whatever the number is, just to make sure it's clear that we can see it. Okay, I'm just going to give it a color, okay, and then I'm going to duplicate it. Okay, so Control D to duplicate. Okay, and this one, just so it's again clear, I'm going to just give it a different color. Okay, so now what we have now is we have two elements that are scrollable, but only within the window that I'm interested in. So this is an example of how you might control what parts of your screen that you actually want to see. Okay, just as an example. So to make up an example, let's create a few different elements in the top container. So let's say, for example, we have a sports app. And in this sports app, we want to have the time. We want the user to be able to add the time and then create a timer and then have a bit of a title up here. And that's something the user constantly sees. And then there is some stats that they're collecting, okay, in this area here that some of the times we need this element down the bottom, some of the times we need that one up the top, so therefore we need to add access both. Okay, so that's pretty much the scenario. So for container one, so we have our, and you'll see also with the widget here, we've got what's referred to now as a nested widget. So within the column, we have two containers, which are the two containers, the one that was going to be the fixed one, the white one there, and then we have a second container, which is the viewing window for the next one, which then has a column, which then has two containers. So you can see very quickly that your widget tree is getting quite complex, but that's kind of just the way it works. Okay, so if we're into here, now we're interested in a container. Now if we want to have a few different elements in this top container, what we want to do is we want to create rows within that container. Okay, so where we can place objects. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add a row. Okay, and I'm going to add a second row. So we'll have two rows, a row and a row. Okay, cancel. Whoops. We should be able to add another row, I think. Without that, no. I don't know why it's doing that. Oh, it's because, sorry, I made a mistake. Because you're stacking items one on top of the other, when I click this, it's basically giving me the option saying, well, whoops, that's not a row and a row. Apologize. Hang on. When we have click the wrong button, we have two rows. Basically what it's saying is, well, actually, if you've got one row on top of another, what you should be doing is wrapping this in a column. Okay, so what we've now got is a column. So it's automatically recognized you need a column. So I've got column with two rows in there. Okay, so we can add elements within there. Okay, so if we want to have some elements, let's start with some text. So let's say we add in the first row, we're going to add just the one piece of text, and it's going to be a text here, and where we better start, and that's going to have the quarter. Okay, so for the purpose of just for starting off, I'm just going to put in a quarter one. Okay, I'm going to do some quick styling just to make it all. I'm going to whack some padding in so it's not right up against the corner there. Okay, and then what I'm also going to do is that because it's a major title, I'm going to increase the font to, let's say, semi-bold, and we'll make that font a bit bigger. So I'm making 20. Okay, so we've got quarter one. Okay, and so what you could do later on, if you're doing this properly, is just like we did in the previous lesson, or lesson 4 that was, we could make that quarter one, just so you're starting to think about how to design these things. For this text here, we could make this dynamic and have it so that we have the quarter change over time once the person's finished, and we could combine the text, and we could have quarter and then a variable with the quarter amount there. But we won't do that for today's thing. Okay, the next thing we wanted to do is we wanted to have a timer. So I'm going to add a timer in, and this is a new widget we haven't used before, and I'm going to put that in the second row. Okay, so for the second row, I'm going to click widget, and I'm going to search for a timer. Okay, now we've got our timer, and then what I want is I want 3 buttons to go in. So I'm going to add into that row button. And what I can do is I can click on it and hit duplicate and duplicate. Okay, and then what we have is we have a row that has the timing values shown there. We have 3 buttons. So what we might want to do now, and this is when we click on the row, we can actually have a look at the alignment. Okay, so we can have a look at what the alignments do. So for example, if we want to do that, everything moves into the middle. Still doesn't look great. So why don't we try this? And you can see it's now spread evenly across the row. Okay. Now, what at this point I'll highlight is that you can see with the row has the same sorts of properties as the column, except it's going across the screen rather than down. So if you see here, we've also got scrollables. So for example, if you had an app where you had an unlimited data going across the screen, you could make it scrollable so that you could move drag the row across to see different elements. So for example, in dating apps and things like that, where you've got people's profiles and there might be 1,000 people's profiles, you can just scroll across them until you find a profile you like, as an example. Okay, so what we can do now with this row is we want to start to format it a little bit, and again, this is all about showing you all the different things you can do. So for the rows, what I think I might do is we might put some padding around that, just to format it a little bit, and I'm just going to put 10 around there again. Okay, so we now have a bit of a row going there. Okay, now what we want to do now is we want to make all of this work. Okay, so if we want to make this work, what we would do is we want a start button, we want a stop button, and we want a reset button. Now, whenever you're building apps like this, particularly if you want your app to reach the point of being really professional, the thing is that you need to be always thinking about the visual communication, the visual cues for the user to make it intuitive. So we have 3 green buttons here, and this is where your themes come in from last lesson. We obviously want to visually communicate what these buttons do, so that there's not just the words there, there's also the colors that tell them that. So what we can do is we can say, well, if we go into our background color, and where is it? It'll be here somewhere. Text color, there should be a background. There we go. Background here. This is where your themes come in that we did in the last lesson. So we can say, well, we've got a success or a go button. We might make it that green. Okay, and then the next one, well, stop is always associated with, or stop or warning is also, or error is also associated with red, so we'll do that. And then for the third one, we'll do our black, okay, because that's neither here nor there, okay. And so all of a sudden we've got our setup. Now, we want these buttons to do something. Okay, so we'll quickly set that up. I know this is diverting from the main purpose of this, which is to get used to how we lay out things with columns and graphs, but we may as well get so you learn how a timer works. Okay, so timer is very easy to use. So we're going to have an action. Okay, we're going to add that action, and the action is going to be on a click. We are going to, now because this is another widget, we would go to the widget or UI interactions. UI is user interface, if you don't know what that means. Okay, and then you'll see down there is timer. Okay, once we click timer, and by the way, always, for whatever reason, the actions here always go blank, and you've got to often scroll up. Okay, and then we can just set the action. So Flutterflow makes it really easy to be able to create this thing. So we want it to start the timer. Great, that's perfect. For the second one, same deal. We want to have it click the button. We want to have it stop the timer. Okay, so navigate to the UI interaction. It's a timer, and this time we want to stop it. And then the last one is to reset. Okay, and let's just finish that one off. Timer. So we've got a functioning timer and the reset. Okay, so there you've got your timer all set up. Beautiful. Exactly what we want. Okay, so, and then you might also have in here, you might have, and I'm not going to spend too much longer, but you might also have a couple of other elements like who's playing who and what their score is. For example, is the main things that you want to see the entire time on the screens. Now, we won't bother building that right now. What we'll do next is we'll go to our container and we'll adjust the size. So we now have our element here that we see every single time, and then the other elements here are all scrollable. Okay, now what we can do in terms of our containers, and I'm going to get rid of these horrible colors because okay, and we'll just have this as a background color, primary background. Okay, so we've got our primary background. Okay, is that we might this time want to be able to put some stats in place. So, so how we might do this is the problem with when we put rows in is that the rows will vary depending upon the size of the object. So for example, if we are going to put a column in, so I'm going to add one, we'll show you an example of this. If we have our row within our container, and we'll probably need columns there, so let's upset the apple cart and try and add another row, and it will wrap the column in for us. We'll wrap that in a column, so we should have done columns. Okay, so we've got those set up. So to show you an example of where some of the issues with rows is that let's say we have we want to have a text value, okay, which is going to show the number of a particular event that occurs. So in this case, we're going to have to start with 0 as our default value. And let's say now what we're going to do is we're going to have a button we're going to add in. Okay, and we're going to duplicate that so that we have 2 buttons, and then we'll duplicate this. Okay, and so you might have a stat that you have, and let's say we'll just sort out the alignment. Hang on 1 second. So it's in our rows, okay, and we might have the alignment as something like that. Okay, so now, and I'm not going to worry about formatting them because I obviously would leave it formatted like this. But let's say we have goals, number of goals, and we have for and against. And we might have a column in the end at the top with for and against. Okay, and we'll have for this one goals as well. Okay, just as an example. Now, let's say that's one row we want to have as stats. Okay. Now, what I'm going to now do is I'm going to duplicate this entire row. So if I hit while I've selected row, if I hit Control D, I can duplicate that. Again, I'm not getting overly concerned about the formatting. You would obviously put some padding in, all that sort of thing. But let's say this time, instead of goals, I'm doing shots on goal. Okay. And I'm going to do for both of them, for us and them. Okay. Now what happens here is you can see that this starts to really look untidy really quickly because you've got different sized buttons. But what is also happening with the row, which is why we're doing this demonstration, is that the problem is that with each one of these, that basically you can see that the zeros are moving around as well. So and it just doesn't look very good. And the problem is that because they're not in control, like they're not, their position is not fixed, it's relative to the size of other objects here with the settings that we currently have. This is not ideal, particularly when you think about when you swap to a different size screen, you can see that it sort of spreads it out and gives it more space. So what we need to do is we need something to do to kind of keep these aligned. And so one of the things that we could do is instead of using rows, we can use columns. Okay, so we can have multiple, just like we have multiple rows, we can have multiple columns. So if we start again, we'll just start all this again. And this time what we'll do is that we'll get rid of this row. So we've now got a column. And now what we're going to do, go back to my widget tree. Okay, I've got my 3 buttons. This is my container here, I believe. Yep, that's the container. And I'm going to get rid of this row. Okay, so I've just got a set of columns. So let's say I want to have 4 columns, one with the 2 texts and one with the 2 letters. What I can do is I can add, oops, hang on, didn't quite work. Let's try again. Two containers, we should be, oh, we need a row again. So you need a row, and within the row we have, let's try again, try and do this again. So we have a column, container, that's the container there, sorry. We have a row, okay, we put our row in first, and within the row we add columns. So we add our first column, and then we can duplicate it 4 times, or 3 times. Okay, so we've got our 4 columns, and let's say we want to set up our row with our alignments, and this time we're going to do something like that. All of a sudden we've got a sort of more organized looking thing. Now if we start to populate this with some, so we wanted text here and we wanted text over here, so let's put some of those in. So let's add a text, and let's say we now have 4 different texts that we want to put in, and we might just start with 0 so it looks logical. Okay, and let's say we've got 4 stats that we want to collect. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate that 4 times. Okay, and over here I'm going to do the same thing. Okay, I'm going to insert text boxes, and we're going to make that a 0. And what we can do then is that we can duplicate this 4 times. If it'll let me do it. There we go. Okay, and all of a sudden you can see that everything's lined up nicely. And then if we wanted to put buttons in this column here, let's say we want 4 buttons. Control. Oops, we want to copy the widget. I wanted to duplicate the widget. Okay, and then we'll do the same thing here. Now at this stage we've got vertical alignment, but we haven't got horizontal alignment. So we'll add the buttons in first, and then we'll work on what we could do to actually control that. Okay, So then we have our values there. So what we can use is we could use padding to align everything up. But you can see that by what I'm doing here is that what I'm doing is moving, whether I use rows or columns, to basically create grids of information to control where widgets end up. Okay, so let's say we did for each one of these, we did padding. We need to make these look all right, so we'll do padding of 5, another padding of 5, padding of 5, and then padding of 5. Okay, so we could do that. I'm not going to bother doing it for all of it, but then we can start aligning here and start playing around with that text. So let's say our numbers, we're not happy with our numbers are a bit small. Let's say we want to push that font up to, let's say, 20. Okay, for each one of them, we want to have 20. And 20. Okay, last one. And then we can start playing around with, and we can make it bold or whatever, but I'm not going to worry too much. And then we can start worrying about some padding there. We can start to say, well, the numbers, okay, so that's a bit closer to what we want. And here we can add another 10 padding. Okay, now we're not quite right there because that's still a little bit high. But basically you can see that what we can do is we can align them as we see fit. Okay, 14, 15, 20. Okay, and we're starting to get the things aligned. And once you have them aligned, then it all looks good, and then you can start plugging in the numbers. So essentially, that's how you can use rows and column to basically order your widgets. Now, the one other thing that to be aware of too, which I might show just down here, just as a final thing to finish off, is let's say we have a container, and within that container, I'm going to add another container. Okay. Now, containers are useful for the purposes of, as the name suggests, containing the size of the elements. Okay, so it's just not behaving itself. And we'll mark back the height 100, 10. Okay, and we can't see what's going on here, so let me just give it a background color. Okay. Okay, so I've got a container here. All right. Now let's say instead of infinite, sorry, it just took me a while to get under control. And let's say we only have a 40, maybe 40 is a bit small. And let's say we have 100, okay? So basically with this container, what it means is it contains elements within it. So one of the properties you may not be aware of is that you can use it to contain things like text. Now the reason you would do that is because what it does, if I'm not mistaken, if it lets me put it in, yep, okay, is that what it will do is that the container, the text element has to be contained within the element. So if I then add a longer message, what happens is it wraps the text, okay? So basically that's another property of the container, is that it can force the text to be wrapped. Now this is useful because, and this is a problem that I came across that took me a while to work out how to fix, is that, for example, buttons, you can't put multiple lines of text on it. I've tried and had a good look, and we haven't worked out how to do it. However, with container, we can get that property that we want. But with a container, there's no reason why you can't treat it like a button, in that you have a button, you can add an action to it, okay, and to that action you can and sorry, it's on the text, not the container, but the container, you can then basically say, well, if we tap that container, we do whatever the action is. So this is an example of where the flexibility comes in. So they've got limited flexibility around the button and the way it's labeled, but if we use a container as an alternative with a text in it, in effect we're creating a button, because you can still assign an action to it, so you can turn it into a button, and you can have a button with wrap text. So that's just something useful to know. Anyway, that is pretty much all about rows, columns, and containers. Hope that's useful. Have a crack, have a good play around, and hopefully we'll see you in the next video. Cheers.